The quiet life of a small town is upended when they become suddenly isolated, trapped inside a huge dome that cuts them off from the rest of the country. The story begins when Dale is burying the body of a guy. Meanwhile, the councilman is telling the diner owner he's running for re-election. Elsewhere, a couple is enjoying a good time together. Junior tells Angie he loves her, but Angie reminds him they can't get too serious since he'll be heading back to university soon. This prompts a discussion between them. We then meet Julia, the new editor of the local newspaper, The Independent. Julia visits a resident to gather information about the recent arrival of suspicious propane shipments in town. The elderly woman believes this could be dangerous and potentially explosive, and suspects the sheriff is involved since he dismissed her complaint. Later, after disposing of the body, Dale drives off and makes a call, telling someone the guy he dealt with didn't want to pay his debt and became aggressive, which is why things escalated. A police car makes him nervous, and the officers notice his car is missing the front license plate. Soon after, Dale has a minor accident and gets a flat tire in the middle of a field full of cows. Right then, the whole town shakes from a tremor, and suddenly a cow is split in half by something invisible. A boy named Joe approaches to help Dale and is also surprised to see the transparent wall. Meanwhile, the police report issues with cell phone signals. Back in the field, some birds crash into the wall, and an ambulance nearly does the same. A fire truck approaches the town, and as it nears the barrier, Dale steps out into the road to signal the driver to stop. The firefighter exits the truck and starts to confront Dale, but then slams into the wall. Dale quickly writes a message for the firefighter to contact the government and stop all air traffic as a small plane suddenly crashes into the dome. Dale manages to pull Joe to safety just before debris from the plane's impact falls on them. The only thing working is Phil's radio station, and he feels lucky to be the lone voice on the air. The cops meet up with Dale to figure out what the hell is going on, and they realize the barrier also keeps people on the other side from being heard. Finally, when Councilman James arrives, it becomes clear the entire town is trapped under a massive dome. Back at the barrier, Julia shows up to report on the situation, and we learn Dale used to be in the military. Meanwhile, James breaks into the radio station to broadcast an emergency message, trying to prevent any casualties in town. This happens just as Junior is about to off himself, but he has a change of heart after hearing the councilman's words. James orders all vehicles stopped, and just in time, Nori and her family see a truck slam right into the damn dome. But then Nori starts convulsing out of nowhere. Joe heads home, where his sister Angie asks about their parents trapped on the other side. The hospital is swamped with patients due to the chaos, and Julia arrives looking for her doctor husband. But she is shocked to learn he has not worked there in months. Outside, military types in hazmat suits are investigating the dome. Meanwhile, Angie approaches Dale for a smoke. Unaware, Junior is watching from a distance, getting jealous. As Alice and her daughter arrive, Angie jumps right into being a volunteer nurse to help out. But then Junior starts chasing after Dale, convinced he made a move on his girl. In the middle of their scuffle, Julia shows up to try and calm things down. Later, Julia tells Dale she still cannot find her husband and offers him a place to crash at her house for the night. Things are getting ugly. 12 people dead so far, leaving everyone on edge. The only thing the townspeople can do is look out for each other as they wait for the authorities to step in and fix this mess. Hours later, Angie wakes up locked in a bunker, with Junior keeping her captive, saying he will keep her safe there. When he leaves, we realize James, the councilman, is actually Junior's father. That is why Junior is willing to help him out, since his school is on the other side of the dome. Meanwhile, Julia arrives home with Dale, and through a picture frame, we discover her husband Peter is the same guy Dale killed and buried just hours ago. Julia reckons her husband is missing because he is cheating on her with some other woman, and Dale pretends he knows nothing about the guy, saying he would love to meet him soon. Out in town, the cops keep investigating what is going on. They figure the lockdown might be some kind of punishment. Then the sheriff gets too curious and touches the invisible barrier. Next thing you know, his pacemaker explodes and he drops like a rock. Linda tries calling for help, but the military on the other side cannot do anything. In episode 2, we see Dale beating the crap out of Julia's husband to collect a debt. He gives the guy one more day, but the guy pulls a gun, and in the struggle, Dale ends up putting a bullet in him. Dale wakes up from the nightmare, and Julia comes in asking if he is all right because she heard him screaming. He tells her nothing is wrong and asks about a military ID he may have lost the other day, worried he might have dropped it. Meanwhile, Joe's buddy tells him to rest up after that seizure, saying Joe was talking about pink stars, which they both find weird. On the radio, they hear the military talking about a dome. So Phil wants to tell the town, but his partner shuts that down. The next day, Linda goes looking for James to tell him the sheriff bit the dust, and Julia discovers the military outside has orders to ignore those of us trapped in here. Looks like the town is some kind of experiment. Angie is still locked up in that bunker. When Junior brings her food, she tries to escape again, but no luck. The main door is shut tight, and Junior is not taking any chances. He is convinced Angie changed overnight, right when the dome showed up. He chains her ankle and tells her he will not take her to see Dale at the hospital. Angie tells him she loves Dale, just trying to get a rise out of him, and Junior storms off, leaving her locked up. Elsewhere, James finds the priest in charge of the morgue has been drugged, so he threatens to expose their shady dealings if the guy does not stay quiet. Later, Linda is surprised to see James going through the sheriff's things, but he plays it off like he is just concerned about the will. Turns out, the sheriff left everything to Linda because he loved her like a daughter. At the same time, Julia heads to the radio station, and when she picks up that military frequency, she learns the town is under a dome. So she grabs the mic and tells the truth, leaving everyone on edge about what is going on. The priest sneaks in and takes the key to Linda's new inherited house without her knowing it. Meanwhile, Joe and his buddies see scientists testing the dome with a water hose, and when the kid touches that area, he realizes the water passes right through to the inside. On the radio, they hear the military still cannot identify the dome's origin or material, so they know it is not their doing. Back with Junior, we see him start following Dale to an abandoned house, where the ex-soldier finds the gun he used to kill Julia's husband, now empty. He also finds his lost military ID. Just then, Junior bursts in, accusing Dale of having sex with Angie right there in that very house. Dale was confused, and they started fighting until Dale broke Junior's nose with a punch. Meanwhile, the priest arrives at the sheriff's place looking for a document about propane. He finds it and decides to burn it, starting a huge fire that quickly gets out of control. Joe and his friends spot a dog next to a body cut in half by the dome. They see the fire nearby and hurry to investigate. Linda is surprised by one of her co-workers who gives her some long guns. He tells her they need to be prepared because the situation could go sideways at any moment. Dale shows up and they head to the house together. James gets there first and hears the priest yelling for help from inside the blazing fire. The neighbors start working together to put out the flames with buckets of water, but the fire is spreading. Suddenly, James appears with an excavator and starts knocking down the house to douse the flames. Back in the bunker, Junior tells Angie he killed her lover. She does not believe he is capable of that. Before leaving, he gives her an old photo of them to remind her of their love. Out in town, the priest wakes up and James confronts him, calling him out for starting that reckless fire. The neighbors start cheering for Linda and the councilman, saying they saved the town. But then one of the cops goes totally crazy, threatening to start shooting at the dome, and ends up killing his partner Freddie. Luckily, Dale steps in and takes that maniac down. The town trapped under the dome is starting to spiral out of control as an epidemic spreads. Supplies run low, and the lies keep coming. The story continues as the kids watch the video of Dale knocking down the cop. They're amazed at how fast and skilled Dale is, wondering if he has special forces training. Later in the car, Julia tells Dale she needs to find a way out of the dome so she can see her husband as soon as possible, believing he's on the other side. They arrive at the police station, where Linda is bringing in Paul as a prisoner. Julia takes the opportunity to ask Linda if she feels capable of handling the situation. But it's James, the councilman, who responds by saying they'll need everyone's help. Someone throws a bottle at Paul, calling him a murderer, which causes him to start yelling that the dome will kill them all. This incites panic among the residents, so James tries to calm them down and asks everyone to join hands in prayer. When they got to the cell, Paul starts feeling sick. Linda tries to help him, but Paul takes advantage of this and hits her in order to escape, so he can get away before the dome traps them inside and kills them all. In the woods, Nori approaches a group of guys to ask how she can charge her phone battery to listen to music. She starts flirting with Joe, who invites her to his house since he has a power generator. The next day, James scolds his son Junior for not showing up the night before when the town came together to help. He notices the bruises on Junior's face and reminds him it's not in his best interest to let him down, implying the man called Barbie was responsible. Later, Julia starts to doubt Dale's reasons for being in town just as the dome appeared. When the town announcer approaches them, Dale decides to leave to get food, avoiding Julia's questions. James scolds Linda at the station for letting Paul escape, but she stands up to him, saying she won't be controlled. Linda then leaves to search for Paul. At the restaurant, Nori's worried mother asks around if anyone has seen her daughter since the night before, but gets no information. Elsewhere, Julia sees Junior acting suspiciously and tries to get him to reveal his plans, but he refuses to answer and continues on his way. Soon after, James organizes a search party to find Paul. When he introduces himself to Dale, he discovers Dale was the one who beat up his son, but still invites him to join the search. In a distant location, Junior goes down long stairs in the darkness, unaware that Julia is following him. When he reaches the bottom and hits the dome wall, his flashlight explodes, and he realizes there's no way out. Julia then reveals she was hoping to find an escape with him. That same day, Joe's house is the site of a big party, with his friend inviting all the kids because he has a power generator. The jocks start charging people to use the electricity, until a power overload makes everyone flee. As Julia and Junior return to the surface at dusk, Junior tells her that everything happening in town is Dale's fault, saying it all started when he arrived. Fortunately, they both make it back to the surface just as dusk is falling, and she offers to walk him home. Meanwhile, James is taken by surprise when Paul suddenly appears, pointing a gun at him, wanting to kill him for pursuing him. But Linda, who has also been searching for Paul in the woods, ends up fatally shooting him. That night, James apologizes to Linda for questioning her work and announces he's decided to appoint her as the new sheriff, having seen how capable she is. Later, Junior asks Julia to keep secret what happened today and confesses he never liked being called that nickname. When he gets home, he sees his father with Dale, which creates tension. Junior asks James about his relationship with Barbie, as Dale prefers to be called, but James tells him it's none of his business, and the adults should handle their own affairs. Elsewhere, Caroline arrives at Joe's house to take her daughter home, as she's worried she might have another seizure. But before leaving, the girl touches her new friend's hand, and they both suddenly collapse, experiencing another episode similar to the previous ones, while talking about pink stars. The episode ends with Junior returning to Angie, asking her to help treat the injuries on his hands from touching the dome, and with Julia discreetly going through Dale's belongings to try to find out more about him. The next day, Julia hides a map she stole from Dale's things without him noticing. On the streets, the town's unrest starts spiraling out of control as people grow desperate from being trapped and lacking information. This prompts Linda to pull her gun to threaten the neighbors, until the priest arrives to preach that the dome is God's will to create a new Eden, at which point James steps in to try calming everyone down. Meanwhile, Angie grabs some scissors and goes after Junior when he shows up. She manages to give him a small cut on his hand, but he still manages to hold her down again. Later, Julia follows the map to the announcer's house, where she discovers her husband's car parked, leading her to confront him. But he suddenly faints, and in the hospital, it's revealed the kids have had another seizure episode, with Alice, a psychiatrist, stepping in to take charge since there are no doctors available. When Joe runs into Junior, asking about his sister, the villain claims not to remember seeing her. Just as James and the newly appointed Sheriff Linda arrive, also having collapsed from a fever. Realizing the announcer has the same symptoms, everyone begins to worry, uncertain about what's causing this. Things go from bad to worse. Trapped inside the bunker, Angie screams for help, but all she manages to do is break the pipes, and the small space starts flooding. The situation with the sick people is spiraling out of control, so James asks Alice, the only doctor in town, to take charge. In one of the hallways, Julia corners Dale. She admits to snooping. She doesn't trust him. She wants an explanation, but their argument is cut short when Julia starts feeling sick. Dale slips away and finds Alice, who tells James they might be dealing with meningitis. The bad news is everyone needs antibiotics in the next 11 hours, or it could spread throughout the dome. James makes a tough call. Leaving his son a weapon, he instructs him to guard the door. It's quarantine time. He's got to find those antibiotics. Meanwhile, Angie wakes up in the rapidly flooding bunker. She desperately tries to plug the leak, but it's no use. Back at the hospital, the radio announcer is delirious, rambling about not being able to get to the cabin. Something isn't right. Julia senses it too and confronts Junior. He tells her he found Dale at that cabin days ago, but can't let her leave. But it doesn't matter. Julia manages to escape, grabbing a security card on her way out. Out on the streets, James and Dale find the pharmacy ransacked. James's suspicions fall on the priest. He has to check. They arrive at the priest's house to find him burning all the medicine. He believes God alone decides who lives and dies. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Linda wakes up feeling better. She got the last of the antibiotics, but just in time, her high school teacher died right in front of her. Things get crazy when the patients try to leave, and Junior follows his dad's orders, firing a warning shot. You can see the horror on his face. He tells the others he's just trying to protect them, that he's on their side. He gives a speech about how they need to stick together, then puts the gun down and walks away, hoping they'll make the right call. Julia reaches the cabin Junior mentioned. She finds a document and starts reading, but then she collapses. In the clinic, the kids get an idea. They'll touch hands again while recording on a cell phone to see if they can uncover what's happening. We see them convulse for a third time, and when they recover, they play back the video. They hear themselves talking at the same time about pink stars, and Joe silently gets up and makes this weird gesture. Convinced the dome doesn't want them to share this discovery, they decide to keep it to themselves. Dale gets back to the hospital with James and the medicine. He finds the announcer, Phil, but the guy can't remember what he said to Julia. Dale corners Junior and learns that Julia is headed to the original cabin. Hours later, James gives his son props for how he handled everything at the hospital. Meanwhile, Julia wakes up and thanks Dale for saving her. She also drops a bombshell. Her husband cleaned out their bank accounts and put their house up as collateral. That's when Dale decides it's time for the truth. Peter, Julia's husband, owed him big time. Gambling debts. Dale came to town to collect, but says he never found her when he first got here. Julia thanks him for the honesty, but that doesn't change things. She kicks him out for lying from the start. Night comes, and Alice gets the epidemic under control thanks to the medicine. She and her family take Joe up on his offer to stay with him. He's been alone since the dome came down. Junior walks Linda to the police station. They have a good talk, and she decides to give him an officer's badge for his actions that day. Meanwhile, James meets up with the priest, who comes to his house to give him a share of the illegal business earnings. The priest is desperate to distance himself from the situation, deeply regretting his involvement. He's pleading with James not to hurt him, saying he'll keep his mouth shut. In the bunker, James hears something strange. He goes down to the pipes and finds the place completely flooded, realizing the girl has been abducted. After being trapped under the dome for a week, the town is threatened with attack and running low on supplies. The story presses on, following a day of high drama. At the beginning, we see Joe and Nori meeting to talk about their seizures. Joe believes that the dome is trying to communicate with them, and that they are acting as human receivers that feedback when they get too close. They want to investigate further and discover a beautiful phenomenon of monarch butterflies covering the invisible dome wall, creating a magical spectacle. That same morning, James returns to the flooded bunker, having decided to abandon Angie the night before. When he sees her, she asks him to call the police because his son has kidnapped her. However, James can't believe what he's hearing, so he decides to lock her up again. He takes some time to think about everything that's going on. As James leaves, he meets the priest, who is desperate, claiming that God has revealed to him the name of a town of evil. James doesn't pay him much mind and tells the priest to get out of his house. Meanwhile, Dale meets up with the kids to check out the butterfly-covered dome wall. They're surprised to see buses with soldiers and lots of civilians arriving on the other side, trying to visit their trapped relatives. We later learn that Junior has officially joined the police force, and he comes home to tell his dad about the families showing up. Forgetting about Angie, James asks his son to focus on beefing up security. At the dome's edge, Linda asks Dale to help control the crowds and keep people from touching the invisible wall. She doesn't want anyone getting hurt. But minutes later, she doesn't hesitate to do just that when she spots her fiancé on the other side. Meanwhile, Julia uses the radio receivers and picks up some coded chatter from the military, talking about a specific time. Suddenly, they start listening to a journalist's live report. During the family reunions, Linda finds out she's become a local celebrity, and Nori discovers an unknown man is coming to look for her. Turns out it's her estranged father, whom she's never even met. The priest seizes the moment to start going on about his so-called divine revelation, so James tries to get him to leave. But the priest threatens to spill the whole truth if James doesn't do it himself in 24 hours. Soon after, Alice arrives for her daughter, and Nori's disappointed to learn her mother's had led her to believe she was donor-conceived. Meanwhile, Julia spots her sister-in-law Marie on the other side, who shows her a document that Peter left behind. It turns out to be a letter where he apologizes and tells her she deserves way better than him. Julia starts to believe her husband simply skipped town. When visiting hours end, Dale asks the radio tech girl to help him lip-read a soldier through the dome. The guy divulges some confidential intel. When those butterflies showed up, all the outside officers were ordered to pull out without permission to return. This makes Dale buy into the Reverend's claims, though it's not actually a divine revelation, just audio interference picked up by the device he's using to listen in. The word he decodes is a military code, meaning mother of all bombs, meaning that family visit was really a goodbye because the government plans to level the dome with a bomb, taking everyone inside with it. Linda and Julia quickly get together. Julia remembers hearing on that radio static that an operation was greenlit for 15 hours. They've only got 3 hours to do something. The sheriff proposes herding everyone to a shelter in the cement factory, and James decides to head back to the bunker to free Angie. On the way, he starts apologizing for everything Junior's done, giving the kids some freedom since they're all probably toast in a few hours anyway. When his son gets home, James lays it all out. He's onto the whole Angie situation. Hearing the news, Junior rushes out to search for Angie, not caring a lick about the impending bomb attack. The girl runs home after being locked up for days, hoping to reunite with her brother. But when she gets to her room, her ex is waiting there with a weapon, unwilling to let things go. Still, Junior tells her about the attack about to hit the town and apologizes, saying all he wanted was to help her shape up. This gets through to her, and she tenderly kisses him. In the shelter, Dale shares a drink with Julia, who once again opens up about her missing husband. But they're quickly interrupted by Nori's desperate mothers, who have no idea where the kids are. This prompts Julia and Dale to decide they will sneak out through a secret exit. That's where they discover Nori and Joe roaming the town, searching for Angie. Later, Linda swings by the guard post, where she and her fiancé used to share tender moments. Angie remains embraced with Junior. The radio girl decides to dance out a farewell song with the announcer, and Nori and Joe's new friends run out of time to make it to the shelter. Just as the moment of the explosion arrives, Nori and Joe decide to share their first kiss. But this time, neither of them convulses, and miraculously, everyone in the town survives. Even though outside the dome, it's total devastation. Seeing this, the priest tells James that God has decided to spare them all because he repented of their shady business dealings. Furious, James grabs the priest's face and slams it into the dome wall, causing his earpiece to explode on impact. Everyone in town is freaking out to see the dome still standing after the missile strike. Linda tells James the priest died after touching the dome, and he shows some surprise. People are starting to panic because there are dead people and their supplies are running out. At home, Angie is relieved that everything is okay, but she fears what Junior might do to her now that they are alive. She hits him on the head and escapes. On the road, Alice feels sick and forces her wife to pull over because she is burning up. Disoriented, she almost gets hit by a truck, which ends up crashing into one of the town's water tanks. It turns out Alice is diabetic and should have taken her insulin hours ago, but she has no more doses and her condition worsens. To top it off, when they get to the hospital, they find there are no more medicines. The radio station detects a frequency blocker nearby. The kids use a homemade tracker to find the source of the noise they recognized just before the missile launch. The sheriff and Dale go to a lake to investigate the water loss. But upon arrival, they discover dead fish and that the water is contaminated with methane. They inform James, who comes up with the idea of talking to a neighbor with a water well on his property, who maybe can help the rest. But before that, Junior approaches him to tell him he couldn't find Angie. James tells him he has to find a way to control the situation because if everyone finds out what happened, it could damage his image. Later, the dynamics of the town change when money loses value and stores only accept batteries and methane as payment. That's why Linda is getting ready, since at any moment she will have to enforce rule number 2, maintaining control using her weapons. The owner of the water well refuses to help the town, as he has had a rivalry with James for years. To access it, he asks them for payment in propane barrels. When things start to get out of hand, Linda forces Junior to help her at a store where some people are looting. Suddenly, Angie arrives at that same store, and before her ex-boyfriend can come out to catch her, she manages to run to the restaurant. There, Angie asks the owner for help, tells her what Junior did, and the woman tells her she will protect her and her younger brother. But amidst the panic in the streets, 2 men enter the restaurant to steal food. The owner tries to defend herself, but the thieves are stronger. One of them hits her with a bat, killing her, while the other also hurts Angie. In town, Nori and Joe enter a diabetic's house to steal his medication. Before leaving, they find a child who confesses that he is the sick person. The girl regrets their actions, but takes 1 dose for her mother. She leaves and finds Julia, who is searching for the signal blocker with the radio girl. They are surprised to discover that the signal is coming from the 2 kids. Joe tells them about the seizures, and Nori confesses that they both talk unconsciously about pink stars. Hours later, James brings 3 large propane barrels to the neighbor so the townspeople can use his well. The neighbor says this payment is only for 1 week and demands much more. He no longer respects any documents or police orders because no one has authority over anyone else. At the restaurant, the 2 looters are about to leave with the food when one decides to return to abuse Angie while she is unconscious. Luckily, Dale enters just in time to stop him and beats the guy up. He carries Angie and asks Linda to take her to the hospital, but the people have broken the tires of the police car. Linda decides to change the plan. Apply rule number 2. Before she can shoot, a rain starts to fall on everyone despite the dome, making the neighbors happy and collecting all the water possible. The bad news is that Dale asks James to help Angie. Meanwhile, Julia and the kids reach the edge of the dome and discover it has its own microclimate because it's not raining outside. At one point, the kids touch the invisible wall together, and the radio starts working again because they removed the frequency blocker. Julia begins to think that they are connected to the dome and that it is protecting them by sending rain when they needed it most. It sounds crazy but makes sense, so she decides to keep it a secret to protect the kids. Minutes later, Nori arrives at the hospital to give Alice the medicine, who stabilizes, but will soon need another dose. In the streets, Julia approaches Dale in the rain, resting her head on his shoulder, touching his hand and giving him a tender kiss. A while later, Angie wakes up next to James, who tells her that the cafe owner died in the attack and that his door is open for her to leave whenever she wants. He asks her to reach an agreement. James confesses that he always knew something was wrong with Junior since his wife died, so he gives her his word that his son will never touch her again. He also offers her money or anything of value in exchange for forgetting what happened and not telling anyone. The girl wants her brother to be safe too. The chapter ends before she can accept the deal because Junior arrives and is surprised to see them together. The story continues with our protagonists who, after a passionate night, hear someone knocking on the door insistently. When they go downstairs, they meet Julia's 8 months pregnant neighbor who comes to ask for food because the supermarket is completely empty. Dale takes the opportunity to leave because he must continue helping the police. At the same time, we see James angrily arguing with Junior over what he did to Angie, calling him sick and threatening to hurt him if he ever goes near her again. To remedy this, James tells Angie she can stay with him as long as she needs, but she realizes he only wants to keep her quiet. She decides to leave to say goodbye to her friend, whose body is still in the cafeteria because there is no one in charge of the funeral home. Harriet sees her boyfriend returning from outside the dome, but when she touches him, she realizes that he is an illusion. The touch of the dome causes her to go into premature labor. The police station is understaffed, but Linda is determined to arrest the 2 brothers who killed the diner owner. Dale patrols the town. Angie finds Rose's body in the restaurant. Joe's best friend tells her that Joe is okay and offers to help her. Ollie is sharing his well water with the townspeople, but James discovers that Ollie has taken over his propane property. One of James's thugs beats him up when he tries to get it back. Nori and Joe touch the dome again, but nothing happens. They start to think they're in the wrong place and plan to look for the core where its power is concentrated. In the forest, their dog starts barking at a specific spot and then runs away. They follow the dog and find a mountain of fallen leaves covering a much smaller dome with transparent walls. Inside is a black egg that leaves them stunned. On the way to the hospital, Julie and her neighbor are stopped by the diner robbers who want to steal their gasoline. Dale arrives just in time to save Julie and her neighbor, but the 2 boys escape. At Joe's house, Alice starts to feel better. Dale arrives and asks for their help. Harriet is about to give birth and is very nervous about having a baby in the middle of all the chaos in the town. Ollie arrives at James' office and tells him that he now owns a large crop field and has a lot of propane in reserve, so he doesn't really need his help. He also warns James that he must cooperate with whatever he orders if he doesn't want to see the whole town starve. The 2 brothers flee from the police to an abandoned site where they are surprised by Junior and Linda. They are arrested, but the boys try to escape. The sheriff shoots one of them, while Junior decides to kill the other as revenge for trying to abuse Angie a few days ago. In the forest, Joe tries to talk to the small dome as if it were a technological system that can be deactivated with a voice command, but this doesn't work. He and Nori decide to touch the dome at the same time. Allie appears in front of them, but when she takes her hands off Joe, they see her mother's image disappear. At the same time, Allie is attending Harriet's childbirth when she suddenly starts to feel sick. Dale takes control of the situation so that the baby is born healthy and safe. That night, Ollie's bodyguard starts to feel like someone is following him as he takes the propane out of the property. He is suddenly surprised by James, who shoots him, causing him to explode in a matter of seconds. Childbirth becomes complicated when the umbilical cord is wrapped around the baby's neck. Alice gives Dale instructions on what to do, and they are fortunately able to save the baby's life. Harriet names her daughter Alice, but the happiness is short-lived. Harriet suddenly faints, saying that she feels something in her heart. At the diner, Junior surprises Angie when he cleans the place up with his brother's best friend. He asks the boy to leave them alone, but the boy decides to stay and accompany Angie while she talks. Junior tells Angie that he can't force her to love him. He apologizes for what he did and tells her that the brothers who attacked her will not bother her again because he has taken care of them. Back at Joe's house, Dale is worried about Alice's condition. When Nori arrives, she learns that her mother has suffered a heart attack because her insulin levels are very irregular. Nori decides to see Alice to tell her that the dome showed her that something was wrong with her health. Alice begins to feel that this will be her last family conversation, so she decides to say goodbye to her daughter and wife. A few seconds later, the inevitable happens, and Alice dies after saving many people in the town. At the same time, Angie finally reunites with her younger brother after many days. But then Nori runs out because of her mother's death, and Joe decides to go after her.